last week we started to look underneath the layers of the Battle of the Kings, and we began to see that there was more to it than just meets the eye. And on the surface of it, in the natural, there were 9 kings that were mentioned. Yes, I'm sure it was the 5 kings that ruled. The 4 kings then had served him for 13 years, and then they rebelled in the 14th year, and they waged war upon the kings. They met in the vale, or the valley of Siddim, which was full of slime pits. Now, these were traps that cause you to sink into it and to be consumed. I don't even think we went into those last week. And the 4 kings then gained the victory over the 5 kings. But in the process, they took Lot. And I think this is important because there is a reflection of how God protects his own, and how he answers prayer, and how he protects those that have gone astray at the prayer and prayers of those that are praying for them. And Abraham was praying for Lot. And think about where Lot went to. He went into the darkest place, a place that was full of debased activity. Abraham prayed for him. And no, I'll not go into that yet. We'll wait until we get there, whenever he's being rescued.
Can I just ask you, were those 4 kings, were they giants?
I don't think so. There were the giants that were mentioned in the passages. There were, in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings with him, and defeated the Rephaim, Ashtot, Karaim, and Suzim. They were giants. They were the names of the tribes that were giants, and that's in verse 5. So the 5 kings may have been giants. In fact, this passage reads, yes, the 5 kings may have been giants. I'll have to look into that one again. There were definitely giants in the land, that was for sure, because they're named there. They're all named. It doesn't say that the kings, when Amraphel, the king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Eliezer, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim. Goyim is actually just the nation. That's what it means. They made war together against Bera, king of Sodom, and against Birsha, king of Amorah, Sheba, king of Admah, Shemever, king of Soyim. It doesn't say that the kings were, but they seem to be over a people who were, so they may well have been. Yeah, they may well have been. We know that at least one of the nations were giants from it. We do know that, but I think there was more than one. And Abraham, after defeating the kings, we actually began to see that these kings that Abraham defeated, were in fact representing giants in his own life, if you like. They were actually, can you remember what they were representing? Chedorlaomer was the head, the leader.
Yeah.
And what was his?
Identity.
That's right.
Yeah.
He was the communicator of false position. So the first thing that the greatest giant in our life attacks is our identity. And that's the primary one. Amraphel was the communicator of darkness or deception. And so they come in deceiving us regarding our identity. They create chaos in our life, causing us to believe that we can't overcome. That's what it causes us to believe. And there's a lot of the things that come about the breaking of the yoke with the title. And so it's quite interesting to study those things out and to look at how these names, what they represent in scripture. So we got to verse 17. The king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer and of the kings that were with him at the valley of Sheva, which is the king's dale. And the king of Sodom said unto Abram, give me the persons and take the goods to thyself. That is actually what I've put on. That's verse 21. The king of Sodom said unto Abram, give me the persons and take the goods for thyself. I've raised that up because I just want to deal with that particular king, the king of Sodom, before I go on to the next king. So that was verse 17, followed by verse 21, just for the purpose of clarity there. So the first two kings came out to meet Abraham, the first of two kings, the king of Sodom. Okay, so two kings. We have the king of Sodom, and we're going to see in a moment that the king of that Melchizedek comes out. The most dangerous time for a person is when they've just won a great conquest. It's actually one of the most dangerous times because you relax and you have a false sense of security. You actually believe it's all over, it's all finished, right? And this would have been where Abraham, especially if he had defeated these particular kings by the names that they were given in his own life. At that time, we can incline ourselves towards pride and feeling sort of full of our own self-importance as well. What we can see is how much and how far Abraham had come on that journey, where he had overcome various things in his life. He had forsaken his homeland. That's not an easy thing to do. He was told to go from the land of your kin and from your kindred. He had forsaken left behind his family. Remember, he'd separated even from Lot here. He had forsaken the idols that he had known and grown up with. He had forsaken the darkness, and he had learned his true identity and entered into that somewhat to this degree. And remember, our identity is something that we work on continuously, really. And he had forsaken the dependence on self. Up until now, a lot of what he was doing he was looking after number one. He was trying to find ways. He was lying about Sarah and things like that, not being his wife, to try and protect himself based on his personal ability and not based on trusting God. And now, what's the challenge that he is given here? The king of Sodom said unto Abraham, give me the persons and take the goods to thyself.
Yeah.
This is a deal being offered, really. That the king is saying, I want the people, take all the belongings, take everything. That actually sounds a wee bit to me like when Jesus was being tested. If you just bow down to me, I will give you all the kingdoms of the earth. So the challenge here is riches for Abraham. He's been offered something. The name Sodom actually means burning, just by the way, in case you were wondering. Abraham refused to take anything from this source. He says, I won't even touch as much as a shoe latchet. He wouldn't associate himself with the sordid things, but rather chose to keep himself separate. Remember, this king had come out of the city very, very debased in what it was doing, and Abraham says, I'm having enough of it. Lot went straight back in, but Abraham said, no, this is unhealthy, it's not good. And this is really a spirit that's behind this, trying to suck Abraham into this culture. Partaking of this would have caused him to be bound by this agreement to this king, and he would have yoked himself, because look at this agreement. He says, you take the things, I take the people. This was a contract. When we enter into ungodly contracts for personal gain, there's consequences. Romans 1:32 says, although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things are worthy of death, they not only continue to do these things, but also approve of those who practice them. See, that would describe Lot. Not only do the things worthy of death, but they continue and they approve of those who practice them. We need to be careful about what we enter into, what compromises we're willing to submit ourselves to in order to get to gain what we think we want. Verse 18, Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High. And he blessed him and said, blessed be Abraham of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the Most High God, which has delivered thine enemies into thy hand. and he gave him tithes of all. This is quite interesting because that was actually verse 18. So we don't know the offer of the king of Sodom until verse 21. We see that the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Kedar and of the kings that were with him. We actually see here the first offer was the king that came forward to make an offer. And then in the next verse, that actually looks like the two kings were there at the same time, because it goes back then to talk about the king of Sodom. You actually never really hear anybody teach on them, and you only ever hear everybody picks out Melchizedek to teach on. But here we have the offer of the king of Sodom, and then Melchizedek, king of Salem, who brings forth the bread and the wine. This is clearly a choice being presented. These two kings obviously represent the choice. And as we all have a choice, we all have that choice. But Melchizedek is the second king that presents, and he comes with bread and wine. Matthew 6:24 actually addresses this. No one can serve two masters, for either they will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. So we have one or the other. This meeting place, when I looked at that and thought, okay, I've never actually heard anybody teaching on the fact that both the kings were there together. But this meeting took place on the valley of Shiva. The name Shiva actually means level. So this looks like the meeting took place on a level playing field, which would bring it back to the Garden of Eden, where the two trees were placed together in view with a choice, a level playing field. Nobody was going to promote their agenda. You just had to make the choice. God said, this is the way, what you should do. If you eat from that tree, this is what's going to happen. He gave them the information, and it was a level playing field. And I think that's what this is as well. God does allow us free will to choose evil if we want. Same as the cross. When Jesus was on the cross, it was a level playing field. He was between two thieves. The offer was the same to both thieves. One chose. They both chose, but one chose righteousness. So, Melchizedek, who is Melchizedek?
Represented Jesus.
He did, yep. Mm-hmm.
The high priest, or priest to the people.
Yes, he was, that's right. What does the name mean?
King of righteousness.
Mm-hmm.
King of righteousness.
Yep. Melchizedek is a title, not his actual name. It's like Christ, it's a title.
Mm-hmm. So he's the priest of the Most High yep. God.
Do we have an identity on him in Scripture?
Well, Jesus is the great high priest.
Yep.
So he was a forerunner of Jesus.
So John
Absolutely, yep. What, Carmel?
John the Baptist?
No, Melchizedek.
I know, but who was he like? Was he like John the Baptist?
John the Baptist was a forerunner, but John the Baptist was never seen as a type of Christ. He was seen as somebody who introduced Christ, who made the path straight for Christ. There's actually three primary views on the identity of Melchizedek.
Yeah.
Scripture is not clear. There's a fourth one, and I don't know if it's a primary view or not. But the first one is that Melchizedek was like a good priest, like a good version of Balaam. Okay, because Balaam was actually a prophet of God. He just wasn't very good. Balaam wanted, it's interesting because Balaam actually wanted the rewards of righteous living, but he didn't want to actually pay the price for righteous living. Mm-hmm. That actually could describe most Christians, or certainly many Christians. They want to enter into the rewards, and I think that's where legalism, the term, was birthed, was because they want all the rewards without entering in. But if this view was true, it still does not explain the absence of genealogy or the account of being a priest and a king that we see, because it says Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was priest of the Most High God, and he blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abraham of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the Most High God, which has delivered thine enemies into thine hand," and gave him tithes of all. But we know in Hebrews it tells us that he was without genealogy.
Where did he come from then?
Well, we're going to explore that. That's what we're actually going to look at. I don't have a conclusive answer to this. I'm giving you some of the options of what people say. The jury's still out for me on certain aspects of it, but because I can't reconcile all the facts, to be perfectly honest, I think there's problems with all the views.
Would he have been an angel?
That's the fourth view, yep. That is the fourth view. This Melchizedek, that's actually, we call him Melchizedek because that's how we pronounce it, but it's Melchizedek because the term Zedek means righteousness, and Melech is the king. So a Cohen, a priest of God, Elohim, met Abraham on the way back from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, and Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. This is Hebrews chapter 7. Now, first of all, by translation of his name, he is King of Righteousness, and then he is also King of Salem, which means King of Peace. There is no record. The Messianic Jewish Bible reads it this way. The King James says, without father or mother. But this one says there is no record of his father, mother, ancestry, birth, or death. Rather, like the Son of God, he continues as a Cohen or priest for all time. Just think how great he was. Even the patriarch Abraham gave him a tenth of the choicest spoils. Now, the descendants of Levi who became Kohanim priest have a commandment in the Torah to take a tenth of the income of the people, that is, from their own brothers, despite the fact that they are descendants from Abraham. But Melchizedek, even though he was not descended from Levi, took a tenth from Abraham. So we actually can see quite a lot of information. We know that he was a king and a priest. What was the priestly lineage? What tribe were the priests out of?
Levi.
Mm-hmm. What tribe's the kings out of? The lion of the tribe of?
Judah.
Yep. So they're distinct. You never have a king that crosses over to be a priest, and you don't have a priest that crosses over to be a king.
Yes, yes.
And we'll actually see this when we're still looking at the first view on Balaam. Leviticus 16 verse 2, and the Lord said unto Moses, speak unto Aaron thy brother, that he come not at all times into the holy place within the veil before the mercy seat which is upon the ark, that he die not, for I will appear in the cloud upon the mercy seat. So here we know that the instruction is given of who can and who cannot enter behind the veil. We go to Chronicles 26 and verse 18, and Uzziah the king, who was actually quite a righteous king, he wasn't one of the evil kings, and they withstood Uzziah the king and said unto him, it appertaineth not unto thee, Uzziah, to burn incense unto the Lord, but to the priests the son of Aaron, that are consecrated to burn incense, go out of the sanctuary, for thou hast trespassed, neither shall it be for thine honour from the Lord God. So here we see the instruction, and the priest has said to him, look, Uzziah, you're a king, and this is not permitted. You cannot burn incense. You cannot come into the sanctuary. Go out, for you have trespassed, and it's not honourable to God. Then Uzziah was wroth, or he was angry, and had a censer in his hand to burn incense. And while he was wroth with the priests, the leprosy even rose up in his forehead before the priests in the house of the Lord, from beside the incense altar. And Azariah, the chief priest, and all the priests looked upon him, and beheld he was leprous in his forehead, and they thrust him out from thence. Yea, himself hasted also to go out, because the Lord had smitten him. And Uzziah the king was a leper unto the day of his death, and dwelt in a several house, being a leper, for he was cut off from the house of the Lord. And Jotham his son was over the king's house, judging the people of the land. So we actually see that the king couldn't actually enter in. So to say that it was a type of Balaam as well, he couldn't be a priest and a king. He didn't have no genealogy, because we know that Balaam was the son of Beor. So the genealogy within that was identified here. So we have a number of issues that I don't really see that version as being viable in terms of, but we know as well, a king and a priest is not something that is depicted in the Old Testament. Where is it found that a priest can be a king as well? In all of Scripture, where are the only places that you will find a person to be a king or a priest?
Christ.
Yep. So we have Melchizedek, we have Christ.
I says we could be kings and priests.
That's right.
Yeah.
Those are the three groups. We are kings and priests.
Yeah.
And so there is an order of, after the order of Melchizedek. What is the order of Melchizedek? Melchizedek, Christ, and us. So we come under the order of Melchizedek.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's the righteous. But I do believe that the order of Melchizedek are those that are mature sons of God, as opposed to there's two names for children of God, and teknon and huios in the Greek, and one, the teknon is basically talks about a young child that needs a babysitter, and huios is a mature son of God who will be the person that rules and reigns. The second view is that it's a theophany or a Christophany, which is a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ or God. What are the offices of Jesus? We've named two of them, priest and king. He's prophet is the other office that he sits in. He is our saviour, but he's the prophet, is the particular office. That's the third one. Psalm 110, verse 4, the Lord has sworn and will not repent. Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So here we're talking about this New Testament order that's introduced as in the Old Testament by Melchizedek as a type and shadow of what's to come. Hebrews 6 verse 5, so also Christ glorified not himself to be a high priest, but he that said unto him, thou art my son, today have I begotten thee. As he saith unto, also in another place, thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So we see that the order of Melchizedek is a never-ending and everlasting order, that it is without beginning or end. So it always was and always will be. We see that it's in Revelation 1:6, he hath made us kings and priests unto God and his Father, to him be glory and dominion forever and ever. And so we actually don't have a beginning. We had a beginning in our physical bodies, but we came out of Christ. He birthed us out of the decision, let us make man in our image. And so I believe that in our spirit that we always existed. We came to reside in this physical body. I'm not quite sure why God thought that was a great idea.
Well, definitely not, especially one that ages.
It didn't when he created Adam and Eve. It didn't then, but we came from that decision anyway. We do know that. So he was the king of righteousness. He was the king of priests, without genealogy or without record of genealogy. It depends on what version. And I tried to find out whether record was in it or not. And there's records with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Apocrypha, various things, but I couldn't find out whether or not that was in the original text, that the term record was in the original text. So we have to shelve that one for now. I'm sure the information is somewhere, but I couldn't find anybody who knew, and I couldn't find it in any of the literature. A theophany or a Christophany. John 8:56 is when Jesus speaks about Abraham, and he says, Abraham rejoiced to see my day. Before Abraham, I am. Now, we see Jesus then identify himself as the great I am. And there have been arguments that because he referred to the day that before Abraham was, I am, that Abraham rejoiced to see him. However, it actually uses the name Abraham. And at this point, Abraham is still Abraham. He hasn't made the transition into his new name. So I have a little bit of an issue of that being the case there. It might be splitting hairs, but I do know that God's very precise and the Holy Spirit's very precise. Pay tithes. This is the first reference to tithing. Hebrews 7:1 says, "For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from," again, it actually refers to him meeting Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings. So whether this is just a translation issue or not, I'm not sure. "And blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all. First being by interpretation king of righteousness, and after that also king of Salem, which is the king of peace, without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of God, abideth a priest continually." Tithing. Can this be used to represent a model for us tithing? It was before the law, remember, as well.
Yeah.
10% being the standard payment of a king
Aye.
for the spoil of war in those days.
Yeah.
Not interesting. So this would have been seen as a standard payment. Wherever it originated from, this was acknowledged to be so. Does God own 10% of our finances?
Only when we give it to him.
God owns all of it.
All of
That's
them.
right. God owns all of it.
All of it.
God owns 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But he just asks that we demonstrate by giving him 10%.
I once heard it being taught about this, and somebody says, "Do you know what? I never want to be legalistic, and I never want to be under the law. So I'm always going to give him at least 11%.
That was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
That's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
But if he owns it all, the argument about whether or not we tithe, therefore, is invalid.
But you can never outgive God anyway. It actually works the opposite. The more you give, the more you end up getting.
That's right.
So it actually, if we actually think of tithing in a way that is in some way a detriment to us, if we were to give 100%, I can guarantee you God would give us 200 back.
That's exactly right.
I think it says that, isn't it, in Malachi? It gives you that in Malachi.
Pressed down, shaken together, and running over.
Is it 10%? 10% of your wages before tax or after tax?
Again,
After
if he owns
tax.
100%, he owns it all.
Yep.
I heard that explained actually whenever God says to render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and then to God that which is God's. So I thought that was the tax goes to your governments first, and then you give 10% of what you've left.
Again, it comes back to the 100%.
Yeah.
What are we actually doing?
If we don't trust him in this area of finances, that is the least. And that's, I think this is where many of us fall down, because we're trying to work out what 10% means or what that means. The issue is actually, where is your faith? And if your faith is where it should be, then I don't think the 10% issue ever becomes a thing, because you will give according to your faith.
That's right.
And where does the offerings come in then?
I think the offerings come in when then we do something that is in our heart to do. That when somebody's in need and you do a charitable act just to bless them, just for the purpose of blessing them, because, you know, God places something in your heart and you think, do you know what? I'm just going to give that as a blessing.
Yeah. I agree with you.
and that's something that we do over and above what would be perceived to be tithes. You see, we're all subject to the spiritual law of sowing and reaping, which is what Mallory was just saying there. Really, the bottom line is that when we do cast our bread upon the water, it by a spiritual law has to come back to us.
So that's prosperity gospel then.
It is. The prosperity gospel
Which is
is
wrong.
actually true. It's just mistaught.
It is mistaught dreadfully because I love Malachi 3. I love the way that he explains the tithes and what happens, what we bring upon ourselves if we rob God. You know that, don't you?
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
A curse is on all of you because the whole nation is cheating me, bringing the full amount of your tithes to the temple so that there will be plenty of food there. Put me to the test, and you will see that I will open the windows of heaven and pour out on you in abundance all kinds of good things. I will not let insects destroy your crops. And he goes on. But that is God's promise if you tithe correctly. And the Spirit of God will always prompt you who to give, how much to give, and when to give.
Yep.
And some people give their tithes for the year at the beginning of a tax year. Some people give it weekly, monthly, whatever. But I don't think any of us should ever rob God. But then again, I don't think the churches are looking after the widows and the orphans properly.
No, but if we're God-led, we will discover that whatever God leads us into sowing into,
Yeah.
if we hear the voice of God, then we will actually see the results according to the direction, because we will reap. And the thing about it is, I actually heard a teaching on, I'm not sure what it was on, but I remember this wee bit of it anyway, because I thought it was interesting. Because it was maybe 10 years ago, so I can't remember what it was I was listening to. But they were talking about money anyway on it, and one of the comments that was made was that money is neutral. Money's neutral.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have a DNA type, if you like. You know, you don't get like for like. You know, when Jesus went to God with the fish and the bread, he got more fish and more bread.
Yes.
Right? So with money, you don't necessarily get more money.
No.
That because it's a type, you can sow it for a need. It's not the same as a seed, like we were talking about at the beginning. If you plant tomato seeds and you pray every day that it's going to be a carrot, I'm pretty certain that it's still going to be a tomato when it grows, because the tomato seed is the seed that you planted. Whereas this is not a seed with a type, and so you can actually connect it to whatever it is that you want to see coming back, because you use it to purchase things that, as you want. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, you take your money into a shop and you can buy furniture, you can buy a house, you can buy a car, you can buy food, you know, you can buy whatever you want. You can go down the street and buy drugs.
Put a name to your seed down.
Yes, that's what he was saying. It doesn't have a name.
Yes.
And I don't know, I've never tried it in that sense, but I just thought it just came to my mind there. But we do get back according to what we give. And that's the same with anger and everything else. And even live by the sword, die by the sword. That was the message that Jesus said to Peter too. So in Genesis 14:18, Psalm 110, and Hebrews 7, they all refer to this order of Melchizedek. And we see the institution of a very special priestly system being put in place that is higher in order to the old system, a typology or a shadow of what was to come. This Melchizedek is revealing a shadow of something that's to come, that's a very special order, a higher order. And it's a priesthood that has free access to the throne of God. It has access to going behind the veil, is what it talks about. It's a perpetual priesthood that includes kingship. Those are some of the reasons why it could or not be a theophany or a Christophany, depending on what you want to view. The third view is that it was actually Shem, the son of Noah. Shem was still alive at this time, and some rabbinical literature suggests that they believe this to be so. He lived for over 500 years, from Genesis 11, I think. Over 400 years of that was after the flood and during Abraham's lifetime and the lifetime of Isaac. And he was a man that knew God before the flood. So he was deemed righteous before, at that time, he came through the flood and under the other side. He lived a righteous life by all of the accounts, and he is seen by many as a type of Christ. Shem is actually a wee bit of a play on words as well, because in Hebrew, the word Shem means name or reputation. So it could be Shem who is bringing forth the reputation of Christ, the life giver with the symbolic symbols of bread and wine. This is a favoured view by very many people, and it is referenced in lots of rabbinical sources. So that's interesting. There are things that were brought out of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I haven't seen anything taught that gives you a flow in it. That doesn't mean there isn't, it just means possibly I haven't found it. What we do know about this is that this order is based on the patterned Son, Jesus Christ. It speaks of similarity of function as opposed to a particular identity. So the function of Jesus Christ is what's important here. And the function of the priesthood under the order of Melchizedek is important. The first priest after this order, the very first priest, would actually have been Adam, by my reckoning. The first righteous king and priest of the Most High God, who also would have been without father or mother and without genealogy. He was also not born. He was created. And so, likewise, the last Adam was without father or mother, without genealogy. He was born. The fourth view would be that it's an angelic host from heaven that had come down, as opposed to a theophany or a Christophany. But this order speaks of a superior order. He administered a blessing upon Abraham. That's interesting, because the higher always blesses the lower. The word order itself, the root of it is debra, which is cause, manner, reason, decree, or end commandment. And I thought that was interesting. It reflects to answer, to command, to commune, to promise, to speak, to teach. Jesus was both the end of the law, and his final commandment was the very first commandment, to love God and to love your neighbour. He actually incorporated the whole of the law and the prophets in this one or two commandments. It's a priesthood of endless life, and the order is an arrangement of God's mature sons. The other point of it is that iniquity is stopped by the order of Melchizedek. It brings an end to it. Priests and kings. Iniquity was stopped in us by entering into agreement or consenting to the work of the cross. Our consenting to the work of the cross brought an end to iniquity. We got a new nature at that point. We could entertain iniquity in our soul, but actually brought an end to it. It was the end commandment. The order of Melchizedek is associated with an oath. Bread and wine is a covenant. It's a covenant agreement. Unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you can have no part in me. It's the fulfillment of the law. The law brought death, but Jesus, in order to bring life, this is one of the things that I had looked at in terms of the law that governs the universe, that law of vibration. Jesus came and he drew all sin into one place so that it could be swallowed up.
Mhm.
And so in the law, in this, he fulfilled the law. The law was thus fulfilled in him drawing all sin to his flesh. And that flesh was then brutally crucified. Christ did not die. Jesus, the flesh of the body of Jesus Christ, was put to death on the cross. It didn't lessen what he did, but in one act, sin was rendered completely powerless, and the new covenant could then be reinstituted, because it was initially instituted in the Garden of Eden. Man's mandate was restored to its intended pattern, which was to rule and reign as king, which brings us back to Melchizedek being a king and a priest. Did that make sense? Or has anybody got any questions on that bit?
I think Melchizedek definitely was an angel.
Why do you think that,
Because
Ken?
if he was born of human origins, he would have been born into sin, because there was no two human beings completely righteous.
Yep.
And yet he was looked upon as being righteous.
Mm-hmm.
Yet in the New Testament it says that there is none righteous, no, not one.
That's right.
So he had to be an angel.
I have found flaws in all of the arguments. I didn't look that deeply into the angel one, but I see that there's the issue of fulfilling every single detail, and every single detail has to be fulfilled in God's word. He says not one jot or one tittle. I think he quite probably could be an angel.
That's what I think, anyway.
Yeah. But I do think that it's more important for us to, when the Holy Spirit hides something in Scripture, sometimes he hides it for us to find, and sometimes he just doesn't tell us because it's not relevant for us to know about.
No.
I haven't decided which one it is regarding Melchizedek yet, but there's been multitudes of books written about him anyway. I have two on my Kindle, but I haven't had the chance. I was going to try and read one today, but I didn't get the chance to.
All we know was that he was righteous.
He was righteous, and he was the King of righteousness, and he represents Jesus Christ. And he was presented as one of two offers on the table for Abraham to take sides with. But I think that it is important that the King of righteousness, our ultimate King of righteousness, Jesus Christ, came and to fulfill the law, because I have looked at this and I've tried to find adequate interpretation, and I just believe that this was this definition here came out of that video that you sent, Glynis, that all sin was drawn to one place and swallowed up.
Wow.
That's so and so the law in us was fulfilled. The video, in case you haven't seen it, is actually a guy who's rubbing these different noises on a table of salt or sand, and it creates the most incredible designs. But I thought, that's knowing what the law of vibration and the law of attraction, where we attract the like, I started to see that from perspective of Jesus becoming sin.
Wow, that's wow.
It was really, it's quite mind-blowing when you start to see why his whole, because we are a vibration, and he had to draw that onto the flesh, because that's how it entered, through the flesh. So sin entered through the flesh, so he had to become sin in the flesh.
Yeah.
And this one act rendered powerless the sin, and the new covenant could then be reinstituted. And it puts a whole new slant on it, doesn't it?
That's sure.
So this bread and wine, this is an obvious reference to the introduction of the communion elements. And scripture's not clear of the intent of the elements, because in Genesis there's very little said. It's more said in Hebrews. But he may have brought it as a feast for the whole army, because I did think about this. Although the meeting was with Abraham, did they all then sit down to eat? And did it happen like unto the feeding of the 5,000? Because remember, the first miracle was Jesus turning the water into wine, and it pouring freely over and over and over, this pure wine that he had made out of water. So did he present, and then it just became like the feeding of the 5,000? But that was my mind, might have been just running away with me. Or it could have served as a ceremonial offering to God, or it could have served as communion, as in koinonia, the fellowship. And the name for Most High God was El Elyon. Just verse 22. Abraham said, the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto God, the Lord Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from thee even a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest you say, I have made Abraham rich, save only that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men which went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion. Okay, so Abraham said, I want nothing to do with it. We all get to choose, and we all have offers on the table that will cause compromise, that will lead us on to compromise. And Abraham chose not, but it's interesting, Lot clearly seems to have chosen to return to his old life in Sodom without a thought for the consequences, or a thought for the fact that Abraham had set about with his entire 318, whatever it was, servants, trained servants, to go and battle with the kings in order to get Lot back to safety. That takes us to Genesis 15. After these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abraham in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abraham, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. So following Abraham's test of whether or not to go for the money and the goods, or to go for righteousness and partake of Jesus Christ, really, even though it's Old Testament, it's partaking of righteousness. Having rejected that dishonest gain, God declares himself as Abraham's reward and his protection. And here we actually see the declaration that he is the I am. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision, saying, Fear not. Clearly, Abraham was afraid. Fear not, Abraham. I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. So when we reject the riches of the world, we actually will get to see the provision of the Lord. But you notice the pattern that's developing here. As he defeated the kings, and as he walked in obedience, and as he stopped compromising, he was initially didn't compromise too much at all. He says, Go from thy land and from thy father's house and from thy kindred. So he took his father and his kindred, and they all went down the road a bit. Just, that's all they did. Apparently it was only wasn't even 20 miles down the road. So he didn't really go too far. So he wasn't really willing to compromise too much. Then his father died, so he was able to leave that behind, and he took Lot. So he had now left behind his father and the land, and then he left behind Lot. And then God was then ready to make him the promise and to deal with him. And he said that he did not get any inheritance in that land before it. And now when he's got to there, he has these 4 kings to deal with in his own life. And then as he progresses through that, then he gets offered riches. He gets offered a shortcut to his riches, because that's really what's on offer, because Abraham became very rich. So he was offered a shortcut. And then when he passed all these tests, God then says to him, now that we've got those things out of the way, I am your reward. Have we got that clear now? This is the way that it's going to be. If you get rid of all the junk I will be your reward. Verse 2, and Abraham said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless? And the steward of my house is this Eliezer of Damascus. And Abraham said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is mine heir. Which it would have been common practice then. If you didn't have a seed, it would have been the person, and that would have been Eliezer. So Abraham reminds God, okay, let's be clear about this. But way back in chapter 12, you made me a promise, and I see no child. I have no child, no heir. The only heir I've still got is this servant. And how many times in our lives do we get disheartened from not receiving the promises when we expect to receive them? Have we examined our life to see whether or not we're sitting in compromise to what he had told us to do? Have we done what he last told us to do? Because it's after we have taken that step that he will give us the next step. Abraham is obviously disheartened, as anybody would be. God required obedience from Abraham in certain areas. Primarily, if you put it in a nutshell, he told Abraham, leave behind the life you knew and embrace the new one that I'm going to give you. That is when we receive the promises. When we leave behind the life that we knew, then we get the promises. Then we get to walk in the promises. Does he still bless us? And does he still look after us? He absolutely does. But we don't walk in the fullness of it. We walk in it partially. Verse 4, and behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth out of thy own bowels shall be thine heir. And he brought him forth abroad and said, Look now toward heaven and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be. Okay, so it goes from an unfulfilled promise of one son to a promise of a seed that's like the dust of the earth. Now, Abraham wasn't even in faith for one son. So God expands his borders and says, look at the sand of the sea, or look at the dust of the ground. As if it would be easier to believe for that than for one child. Why did God use that example? In chapter 13, he says, and I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth. Up here he has said, look toward heaven and tell the stars, if you are able to number them, so shall thy seed be. And we'll go back to chapter 13. He says, and I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. So first he tells him, you will have an heir. It'll be like the stars in the sky. And then he says, look under your feet and it'll be like the dust on the ground. Why?
Because
Why
he
did
saw
give him
those
these?
things, he saw those things every single day.
Yeah, he did. And that was something, they were nomadics. So they lived in the desert, they lived in tents, they had that traveling lifestyle. But why those two particular examples? Why? One was in the heavenlies and one was on the ground. Why does he compare Abraham's seed in these two particular ways? What does the dust of the earth represent? What are we made of?
Us. The dust.
Yeah, it's natural seed. Our bodies are made of the dust of the earth. And we actually know, even biologically, all the elements that are found in the human body are actually found in soil. It's hard to believe that, isn't it? But that speaks of the natural seed by genealogy. That speaks of the Jews that would call themselves sons of Abraham. What about the stars in the sky? If the dust on the earth speaks of the natural seed, what do the stars in the sky speak of?
Spiritual.
Yep. Spiritual. That is those who would be born of God. And so here we see God is actually comparing those that he would produce in the lineage of his genealogy, the beginning of the Jewish race. And then he is comparing, not only will I give you those, but it will be accredited to you because you will become the father of faith. it will be accredited to you those that will believe in me.
Yeah.
And so those that have that heritage of being born again, and that's where we have those songs, sons of, we are sons of Abraham. I would sing it to you, only you would all shut down. That is definitely not my forte. But you can actually see it quite clearly whenever you start to see it like that, can't you?
Yeah, it's good.
And then it says, and he believed in the Lord, and it was counted to him for righteousness. Faith is always by righteousness is always by faith. It never comes any other way. Never.
Yes.
We can only have righteousness through faith.
Because faith, you don't need faith.
Hmm?
Yeah. You say it, you don't need faith for it.
That's right.
If you say it, you don't need faith for it.
That's right. Verse 7, and he said unto him, I am the Lord that brought thee out of the Ur of the Chaldees to give thee this land to inherit it. So here he reaffirms his promise of inheritance of the land. I believe that God is reaffirming it probably because Abraham had lost heart to begin with. But Abraham, like most of us, was walking in ignorance as to the reason why he was having to wait. We use sayings like, all in God's timing. God says today is the day of salvation. God says today. I believe the timing is in our hands. The timing is when we choose to be obedient to what he says. The timing is when we choose to stop being anxious and worried and walking in disobedience or anger or unforgiveness. Or I could just open up the New Testament, any page of it, and we can read something that would give us an indicator of what it is that we haven't actually been walking in. Does he bless us? Yes, he does. He absolutely does. But we don't get the ultimate fulfillment of the promise that we're waiting for until such times as we actually sit down and say, do you know what? I actually trust you enough to bring it to pass without my anxiety, because anxiety proves that it's not trust. And remember, anxiety is the seed you're planting. And if you plant the seed of anxiety, what you're going to reap is birth out of the law of sin and death, not out of the law of the spirit of life. When we plant the seed in faith, then we reap. And remember, if you want a carrot, don't plant a tomato seed.
So it took Moses 40 years in the wilderness?
Even though he had communication with God.
Yeah.
But it took David. He was still a child. Well, he was a young lad when he killed Goliath.
That's right. He was, they believe he was around about 13, which would have made him an adult in their eyes, not in ours, but in their eyes, because that was the age of the, where your bar mitzvah would have made you deemed to be a man. But yes, I think David was very faithful, but then remember, he also had a journey to enter into maturity.
Yes.
Before he could be king.
Yes.
He was able to be faithful and conquer Goliath, but he had a journey to make it to be a king. During that journey, though, he trained up an entire army of misfits to be a mighty army of God in the caves of Adullam.
And the same with Joseph as well.
Joseph was a man of integrity from the very start, really. And now there would be an argument for God's timing, per se, because he didn't do anything wrong. Although God did bless him everywhere that he was, in every situation.
Does it say about Abraham and Sarah? Does it say, according to the time of life, Sarah shall have a son? And I always wondered what that meant, according to the time of life. Was it God's timing or was it something else?
I'm not sure.
Sorry,
what was it? According to the time
of life.
Of life.
Was that her time of when it would be a miracle for her to have a son?
Genesis 18.
Would it not be God's appointed time?
I thought it was for God's appointed time, just purely because of the lineage and the fact that
For the lineage, yes, there's probably, in terms of when a person is born, there's probably an appointed time. And especially in, you know, our time of birth, we are born for a particular time. Genesis 18, it's in Genesis 18 and verse 10.
Verse 10.
They went.
I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son.
See, the scripture here says, he said, I will certainly return to you around this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Sarah held him. See, both that and the King James says that. We'll see. I'll have a wee look here. See what the Passion says. That's quite a good translation as well. 18. They asked him, where is your wife Sarah? He answered, over there in the tent. Then one spoke and said, I will return about this time next year when your wife Sarah will certainly have a son. All the versions that I've got all say the same thing.
Yeah.
I will return this time, because it's the conversation that the two angels, or the angel of the Lord, says unto Abraham.
Yeah, it says in mine, at the appointed time, I will return to you.
Right. If that would have to be sort of researched under the concordance to see what the and that will be done next week. So it will, because it's in chapter 18.
Yeah,
I think there is an appointment for when we are supposed to. God knows when that appointment is, and he knows when we are going to respond appropriately.
Isaac's birth was a miracle. It was an absolute gift of God to that, because Sarah and Abraham, they were very, very old at that time, and physically impossible to conceive a child.
Yes.
And because Sarah laughed at God and said, you know, I am
it actually
so
tells
old.
you that Sarah was past the age.
Yes, past the age.
It actually said that about Abraham too, but Abraham went on to have children with Keturah. So I think there's something in the translation in there as well, because it says that Abraham was also too old, and I thought, well, he wasn't too old later to have it with Keturah, which is probably 20 years later.
But at that time, God's word does say that it was they were very old.
Yeah.
And I think God gave that blessing to Sarah and Abraham. It was a miracle. It must have spoke volumes to the people that were there.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes these miracles are for other people as well.
Yes.
Yes, it is very interesting to look at the whole and do a full study. When you start to get into the words, when you find anomalies, it's always good to dig a bit deeper.
Yeah.
Because you always find little hidden gems.
The one thing, during a bit of a study during the week, and I spoke to God and I said, Lord, I would really like my faith so that when I breathe, I know it's you. And I want to be like your apostles.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that God said, and if anybody ever feels that the way they're living is not the way that they want their faith to be reflected, I feel God is saying, I have blessed you because you still believe, yet you haven't seen.
Mm.
And there is such a blessing in that. And it's just dawning on me that the magnitude of that blessing. And I think is the discernment that he bestows upon us all is ferocious. It is brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And studying like this, it's just gorgeous. I really enjoy it. And thank you so much for delivering it.
You're very welcome. I enjoy it too. I really, I look forward to it, and you get to dig into things that you, and you know, it challenges me too. Questions challenge me, which is good because I like to go and look for them as well. So in verse 8, and he said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? And he said unto him, take me a heifer of 3 years old, and a she goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he took unto him all these and divided them in the midst, and laid each piece one against the other. But the birds divided he not. And then the fowls came down upon the carcasses, and Abraham drove them away. So here we see this preparation. Abraham follows the instructions that he's given by the Lord. And then he seems to be waiting for the rest of the day, it seems, because he's chasing these other birds of prey away so that they can't get at the animals. And sometimes I think, like, what was he thinking when he did that? Thinking, like, I've done what you said and you're still not here. But Abraham followed the instructions, very specific instructions. The word for covenant is barath, and it means to cut covenant or to split in two. And in those days, what would have happened was people would have cut the animal and in this manner, and then the two people that were cutting covenant would walk in a figure of 8 between the two pieces. So they walked between the two pieces of the sacrifice. And by implication, this act was binding and would result in death if broken. It's actually quite strange, because when you study these rituals out, the Masonic actually use similar oaths, with very, very severe penalties. And many Masons, they think they're having a bit of fun. They've no idea what they're entering into. And in ignorance, they place themselves and their family under a covenant, a blood covenant, with really chilling, blood-curdling oaths of death. And that's why there's so much sickness in Masonic families, and you will find it's the same kind of sickness in each of the families. The covenant in this instance wasn't between two, it excluded Abraham. That made it an unconditional covenant, because Abraham didn't have to, there was no if-then clause in this. Abraham was given a promise, and he says, get out of your land and then I will do this. He didn't do it, but once he had complied, God says, now we're ready to seal this covenant. And so what he does is he instructs Abraham. Abraham gets everything prepared and then sits and waits for God to show up. And this covenant is God alone cutting the covenant. And then when the covenant is cut, then he allows Abraham to enter in as a partaker of his covenant. We too have entered into a blood covenant, whereby we had nothing to do with the covenant making. We just got to be a glorious partaker of it, the work of the cross. It's a pledge of allegiance, a declaration to fulfill every part of the agreement under penalty of death. It's, in this case, it was a covenant ratification. That's what this is. It's a ratification of a covenant. And in this, God was taking full responsibility to complete the covenant alone, with no help. He would walk that walk alone. Verse 12 says, and when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abraham, and lo, a horror of great darkness fell upon him. What does that mean? A horror of great darkness fell upon him. So Abraham was put into a deep sleep, maybe somewhat the same as Adam was when the rib was taken from him, or the piece out of his side, whether it was a rib or not, that's under controversy. What was the horror? It says a great horror of great darkness fell upon him.
A nightmare.
Of what? What was the nightmare?
Of what was to happen, maybe.
Ending into hell.
Well, this part is a little bit conjecture on my part, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway for consideration. In chapter 22, we know that Abraham takes Isaac. It's known as the Akedah. Abraham takes Isaac up the mountain to become the sacrifice. Yep. And it tells us, he said, look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide himself the lamb for a burnt offering. So the two of them went together. Abraham knew in this instance that he was acting out prophecy. How was Abraham so willing to sacrifice his precious promised son and heir. I mean, it says whenever he was instructed to do it, he got up early in the morning. So we've just seen in this instance, God promised Abraham the seed. He promised him the land. He has promised a generation of seeds, so many that he can't number, not just in the natural, but in the spiritual.
Well,
And then he says we're
Abraham,
going to cut covenant over it.
Abraham answered that question himself whenever he says God will provide the sacrifice.
Yeah.
He actually says God will provide himself
A sacrifice.
a lamb.
Yeah.
What I think, because of that statement, I think that the great horror that came on Abraham in that trance state or the whatever kind of a sleep that he was in, whether it was a vision, a dream, a nightmare, whatever, I believe that he saw the cross. I believe that he saw that the fulfillment of this covenant would result in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ in whatever format that he saw it. Because that would be the one way in which he would be able to take his son, his promised heir, up to do this. Because he actually makes the statement that if he does do it, that God will raise him from the dead. And he says that he would provide himself the lamb. In Mark 15:33, it says, "On the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land." And here it tells us that a horror of great darkness fell upon him. So I think that's what he saw. I think that was the vision, that he actually saw the fulfillment of this covenant that was being made before him.
Yeah.
But it is conjecture because it doesn't tell us that in scripture.
My Bible says, Diane, that the great darkness was designed to underscore the severity of the prediction of Egyptian bondage.
Right? Okay. What version's that?
The American Standard.
Right. Okay. Read that again.
The great darkness was designed to underscore the severity of the prediction of Egyptian bondage. And then it says verse 13 in brackets.
Read verse 13 then.
Then 13 to 16, a land that is not theirs, a prophecy of the Israelites' sojourn in Egypt, which was not the land promised to them. The sojourn would last 400 years.
Dear Lord.
Equals the 430 years of Exodus 12.
That's the 13. That's verse 13. That's the next verse that we're going to read. Yeah, verse 13 says, "Yep, Abraham knew for a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in the land, not theirs, and they shall serve them and afflict them 400 years, and also that nation whom they shall serve I will judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. And thou shalt go to thy father in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age, but in the 4th generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full." It's possible. I just think that the greatest horror that would be a darkness, and bearing in mind that the fulfillment of this covenant would be the cross.
Yes, I agree with that. That's what I was getting in my spirit.
I feel that that's the fulfillment, whereas this next part is a bondage is a bondage. We were in bondage, and that's what God came to release us out of. But our bondage, we didn't even know we were in a bondage before that. The 400, they were in the land 430 years. This is just a wee side bit because there's a lot of discussion between scholars between the fact that there's that anomaly of 400 or 430 years. They were in the land 430 years, but they were only afflicted for 400 of those years. 30 years were good. They were under the Pharaoh who knew Joseph. He was replaced with a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, who took them then into bondage. So the first 30 years they weren't in bondage. But that's just a thought, and you can explore it further or leave it on the shelf or dismiss it. It's just a thought that I think explains how Abraham was able to have faith to take Isaac up the mountain to offer him, and the fact that we know that he knew that he was acting out prophecy. And verse 17, it came to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces. In this act, where God comes down as a burning lamp and a smoking furnace, we can actually see hints of the gospel in here, because this appears to be the Father and Son covenanting before Abraham the work of the cross to bring restoration. What they're covenanting is to bring about what the promise, to bring about the promise that he just promised Abraham. What did he just promise Abraham? His seed would be like
Stars in heaven.
Stars
and
The sand.
grains of sand.
how is he going to have two inheritances, two groups of people? How is he going to have a spiritual inheritance and a natural inheritance?
Earth and heaven.
Ken?
Earth and heaven.
But how's he going to do it? If he's covenanted to, he said to Abraham, I will make thy seed as the stars in the heaven and the dust of the earth. How is he going to do this? Because this was something I seen today that I never saw before. When we go to Ephesians 2 and verse 14, we'll go to 13. But now you who were once far off have been brought near through the shedding of the Messiah's blood, for he himself is our shalom peace. He has made us both one and has broken down the mikvah, or the partition that divided us, by destroying in his own body the enmity occasioned by the Torah with its command forth in the form of ordinances. He did this in order to create in union with him from the two groups a single new humanity, and thus make peace, in order to reconcile to God both in a single body by being executed on stake as a criminal, and thus in himself killing that enmity. And the King James says to make one new man. Ephesians 2. So I believe that this is actually contained within that promise, within that covenantal agreement of the dust of the earth, the stars in the sky. And I'll read it from the King James here. For he is our peace, who has made both one and has broken down the middle wall of partition between us, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances, to make in himself of twain one new man, so making peace, that he might reconcile both unto God in one body by the cross, having slain the enmity thereby. And I believe, I didn't see that until today, but I believe that's what's contained in that act. And that's
Diane?
also, yes?
Yeah. I just thinking before you gave that explanation, also when Paul talks about Israel and faith, you know, that not all Israel were in faith.
Yeah.
That was through the promise. There were lots of natural children, but not all were in faith.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
not all were children of the promise.
Yeah, that's right.
And the one new man, does that not mean, Diane, the Gentiles, Paul preaching to the Gentiles, that the Gentiles would, you know, come into the
covenant, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where we get grafted in, yeah.
Yeah.
In verse 16 it says, and that he might reconcile both unto God in one body by the cross, having slain enmity thereby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would confirm that, wouldn't it?
I think so, yeah. That would be my view. These symbolic references to the smouldering smoking furnace and a burning lamp. Couldn't think of the word there, smoking furnace. Those symbols were always associated with God's presence, and it was the same word used in the Exodus and Mount Sinai, and also in the Song of Songs, and it was linked with frankincense and myrrh, which is the deity and the embalming for burial. So here we come back to who he was. It's also in loads of other places, but I just thought those two were interesting. Verse 18, the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaims, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. That's the end of that chapter. Anybody, any comments on any of that? Or thoughts on any of it?
What do you mean by the last commandment?
The last commandment, whenever I talked earlier about that, that was the meaning of the word Deborah. I actually, it was just something I picked up whenever I looked it up. I believe that Jesus Christ was in him was the last commandment, that he had become the final order. It was the last commandment is, in order to enter in, is to take him as your Lord and Savior. I just thought that was a very interesting, I can't find it here from where I was teaching, but I thought that was a very interesting piece of information. It was about Melchizedek. That Deborah, yep, end commandment, yep, it's the word order. So he was, the end commandment was, he is our great high priest. He was the end of the matter. He fulfilled all righteousness. He was the fulfillment of the law, and the law would have been commandments. So he was the last commandment, and his final commandment is love God, and the second is like it, love your neighbor. But I think that he was the end of the law of choosing him. If you choose him and you ignore the laws that govern us in life, such as the law of gravity, you could get to meet him a lot sooner than you originally planned. But outside of that, it doesn't change the fact that you were saved.